Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for NextWave STEM's free webinar series. Today, we will be covering practical STEM applications that can be implemented in class today. I'm super excited. My name is Desmond Martin. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at NextWave STEM, and this is an awesome opportunity for us to dig in a little bit with some STEM applications. Not just applications when we think about the software component, but the actual software and hardware components that play really well together that we can make some quick shifts towards in order to do some effective STEM learning with our students. It has been a crazy time in our respective fields right now. Many of us have had to make really dramatic shifts and changes to the way that we have been delivering our STEM instruction over the past few months. And we've had to make that pivot really, really quickly. It is more than a notion to go from doing hands-on, really engaging STEM learning to engaging our students with STEM learning from home. But this is going to be an awesome opportunity to learn some more about how we can do exactly that. Um, Before we get started, I do want to talk a little bit about some ground rules, just some housekeeping notes. The first is that, and those of us who are on a little bit early have already heard this, even though I know that you are perfectly camera ready and that you've had your honey mixed in with your tea, your voice is beautiful and sonorous, we will neither be able to see you nor hear you because we are in a webinar mode today. That does not, however, mean that you are voiceless. The chat is open. We've been in there sharing a little bit of information about where we're from and what we teach. So is the Q&A functionality. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any funny commentary, please feel free to jump into the chat or the Q&A and share that with us, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered live on the air. In that same vein, we want to let you know that there is no such thing as a bad question. You may be digesting a lot right now, and that means you may have a question a little bit later on. Feel free to email me. I'll be sharing my contact information a little bit later on. My email is really easy. It's desmond@nextwavestem, and I'm actually going to drop that in the chat right now. Another piece of housekeeping is also with respect to our Illinois educators. Today does count as a professional development hour. That means that at the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be receiving an email from me with that certificate of completion. As it currently stands, we do not have a relationship with state boards of education outside of Illinois, but we know that some of you would love to have that proof of attendance. That means that all of our actual participants today will be getting that certificate. So that's something for you to have. Attached to that email will also be a copy of today's slide deck so that you can have this as an enduring resource, and a copy of the video today that will be recorded. So if you have to drop off a little bit early, or there's something that you would love to share with your colleagues, we'll be making sure that you have all of that. Now that we've got those housekeeping notes out the way, we can go ahead and dig right into it. And a great place to begin for us at NextWave STEM is at the beginning. Without focusing so much on what's on our slide deck, the genesis of NextWave STEM, how we came to do what we do with emerging technologies, is really a focus on solving big problems. We thankfully have come through the pandemic, many of us scathed, some of us unscathed. And we are recognizing that we need to do some really creative problem solving. That includes figuring out new ways to integrate technology into our practices, lesson planning, and doing social emotional learning, and doing counseling with our students in new and innovative ways. But we understand that there are larger problems that are facing us outside of the global pandemic right now. Climate change is real. It's causing refugees here in the United States right now. There are citizens who are struggling with potable water, struggling with access to internet, struggling with the ability to retrain and move into different careers. And then there are the questions that we want to solve about the longer term issues of humanity. How will AI affect our lives? What's going to happen? How will we feed billions and billions of people that the planet has never supported before? We believe with all of our hearts at NextWave STEM that the solutions that we need to some of these long-term, huge problems are going to be in the hands of young innovators. Students who are not ready to solve those problems right now, but they're going to be the future scientists and technologists and engineers and mathematicians and artists that help figure out the solutions together. But we understand that it's a path, it's a progression. These young students can't solve problems if they don't get started learning about STEM right now. And the earlier they start learning, the better. Why do we say that? We say that because even in kindergarten, students are forming STEM identities. They're imagining themselves as scientists and mathematicians. They're taking the things that they say and see in science fiction and not necessarily believing them to be fiction, believing in them as things that we can do now. And we've seen throughout the course of the 20th century a progression from science fiction, things like communicators and Star Trek becoming science fact when we saw the first iPhone being released. So enable for our students to solve these problems, they have to have STEM identities. And to have STEM identities, robust STEM identities, they need to have hands-on access to STEM, to emerging technologies particularly. We're talking about things like 3D printing, robotics, drones, and artificial intelligence. We really believe that our courses tailored K through 12 have the ability to give students introductory access to these emerging technologies in real, meaningful ways, ways that build up STEM identities, ways that will allow students to feel comfortable taking AP courses at the high school level, going into STEM fields at the college level, and matriculating and becoming STEM professionals. Those are the kind of outcomes we really want to see. But the most important part of that entire puzzle is you as the educator. If students don't have curricula, don't have the technology, but most importantly, don't have the invested educators to teach them with fidelity and with passion, that STEM identity just will not grow. So at NextWave STEM, our entire goal is to empower you, the teachers of today, to prepare students for the future, futures that they can't necessarily imagine, futures that they can't see coming, futures in which we can see some really, really scary things on the horizon. But we believe that you as educators and our educational system as a whole is up to the challenge if we really, really embrace it. So with that being said, we have one particular goal in mind for today's webinar. We want to explore ways in which students can engage in STEM learning that makes an immediate and positive impact on the world around them. How can our students kind of get off the computer screen or maybe use what they're doing in the computer to augment learning in the world around them? How can they connect the dots? How can they do this work thinking about real world applications? That's what we want to talk about today. So with that being said, we are really excited to talk about what the situation might be like for schools. Before we dig into this particular question of, okay, how do we connect our technology with real world applications, we have to understand where we currently are, what that means for our students, and how we have to situate ourselves to move strategically. Just got a comment here. Hey, Mary, thanks so much for joining us. You ordered a Prusa 3D printer and an iScan scanner to start working with the prosthetics and rescue operations. That's really, really cool. That Prusa printer is a really good brand. I'm so excited to see the kind of stuff that you're working with. I'm going to email you so we can exchange some photos of our 3D printing projects. What is the situation? Well, for the entire United States, we're living in really what we can conceptualize as three different instructional situations, especially when we think about hybrid instruction. And we use a very quick shorthand in NextWave STEM. We have what we call the surge of infections, a not ready to return scenario, and a hybrid instruction scenario. Depending on your location, you may find yourself or you will find yourself in one of these scenarios. The first, called surge of infections, is the one that we would love to stay away from, but we don't necessarily know a lot about this virus and pandemic to be able to predict the future. For the surge infection scenario, many of us have returned back to normal instruction in schools with our students. And God forbid, there is exactly what it sounds like, a surge of infections amongst our student and staff populations. We have to make that shift now, where we started our STEM learning at school and now we have to focus on some remote learning instead. That's in direct contrast to what we call the not ready to return scenario, which is where the majority of us are living. We are still doing remote instruction, meeting with our students virtually, and that means that we've started our STEM learning, our STEM programs as much as we can online. But if we have to make that change at the end of a semester or end of a card marking to doing in-person instruction, that means that we also need to think about our learning goals and our learning targets in our STEM programs and adapt accordingly. And then the third situation that some of us may see, using different student populations as just standard hybrid instruction, where we have a group of students who are at school during some portion of their instruction. That population, you can think of it as an A and B, might be at home for another part of their instruction and switching off with these different students according to schedule shifts. This gives us some particular challenges when we think about lesson planning, but also gives us a particular opportunity that even though we are forced into this remote learning environment, there are still opportunities for those hands-on touch points with our students, whether that's us seeing them in person and being able to interact, or them working with our equipment. The situations can look really different logistically, and we want to make sure that we consider technologies that are adaptable to those situations. So when we think about a hybrid model and our priorities in the hybrid model, we always want to hold in the front of our minds our priorities. The first of which is staff and student wellness. It doesn't work if people aren't being well, and it really actually won't work if people don't feel secure and don't feel safe. That erodes our students' abilities to learn and to focus. And we'll do the same thing with our instructional staff as well. But our second priority is high quality learning experiences for all students. We focus on K through 12 students here at NextWave STEM, and we want to make sure that we're providing the opportunity for all of our students to learn in this hybrid model. But also, something that's really important is to not leave behind our student populations that need high amounts of support, special ed, early learners, our career technical education students. It is really important that they can access the curricula in engaging ways. So what we are focusing, the most important thing I can leave you with is the fact that flexibility is important. And I do say fact. It is important to recognize, we as educators and some of us who may be administrators, that because we can't predict the future of the pandemic, we have to have things that allow our students access and impact. The ability to access the technology in the curricula and the ability for that access and those student learning targets to have an impact. We're building culture. We're building the ability to use STEM to focus on applications that have a real world impact, that are practical. We want to make sure that as our students grow in their STEM identities, they can, for lack of a better analogy, put two and two together to really gain something out of their time working in STEM, even if that work is remote or asynchronous. And Mary, I saw your comment here in the chat. You're exactly right. Math space is suggested for special needs students. We've heard really great things about math space. If you're looking to augment the M part of that STEM work that you're doing, it's really important to kind of go the extra mile. And many vendors, curriculum developers are working hard to make that happen. So now that we focused on some key ideas, the key is being flexibility, making sure that our students have the ability to access curricula and have an impact. Let's talk about access and engaging our students to access to high quality STEM education through the ideas of citizen science. Well, a great question might be, what is citizen science? Citizen science is the practice of allowing our students to observe the natural world around them, but not doing it in a vacuum by themselves. The process of observing, collecting data, and reporting that data because of the interconnectedness of a 21st century world where so many of us are able to use Zoom and email and share pictures and share data, whether that's in a spreadsheet or whether that's in a Facebook post. We're able to now feed into large data sets that are being worked with actual science and not and when I say actual science, I mean with science professionals, scientists, demographers, archaeologists, astrologers, not astrologers, astronomers, physicists. So many of these professionals are doing work in which they need to observe the world in some really robust ways. And when I say robust, I'm talking about big data, taking measurements about temperature, taking pictures of the sky, cataloging leaves, cataloging insects. These science projects are around us in our local communities, and it's a part of a global effort. So when our students engage in citizen science, there's this advanced community of scientists and professionals that are helping to lead our students along this path when we're engaging in science, whether that's natural science or something hard, of a harder science like physics. But we also see this robust community of other science practitioners, both students and professional colleagues. It is an amazing way for our students to really jump in, feet first, with science education, even though they may be remote from the classroom for a little bit of time. So what are some examples? I mentioned citizen science, but what do we mean when we say citizen science, and what would we expect students to do? Well, there are three really quick open examples for us to observe. I've pulled these from actually the Department of Education's citizen science page. The first is the NYC Cyclist Air Quality Study. This project has been going on now for over a year. And it has received some really interesting data with regards to air quality because of the decrease in motorized vehicles in New York City because of the pandemic. Uh, it is a chance for students to actually take air quality measurements, both qualitative and quantitative, and help scientists understand what's happening around them. Students who are living in New York have a really vested interest to know how clean their air is and what the science is telling them. In the same vein, the plastic tide deals with plastic waste, the cleanliness of our oceans, and what students see. And by see, I'm just not talking about SEE, but SEA, ha ha, I know that joke was terrible. But Plastic Tide allows students to get out in their environments, go down to the shore, go down to the lake, go down to the creek, and actually track how many pieces of plastic waste they find. Can we build really good qualitative data about how trash is moving through our ecosystem? That's something that students at a really, really young age are able to engage with. And then we have the Track a Tree project, something that's in this case localized to the United Kingdom, but we see similar projects being done here in the United States, making observations of local wildlife. How many of these tree species do you see in a given area? How are they progressing? Which ones are falling down? Which ones may be diseased? Which ones may be dealing with infestations? How that will that hamper our ecology? How will that hamper biodiversity? What does that say about other data we're seeing from things like climate change and CO2 emissions? These things do two things, accomplish two goals with our students. One, it allows them once again to engage with real scientists and real practitioners and peers, but also allows them to get out of their houses while they're doing academic work. Our students are cooped up. It's been difficult for our students to really engage, and these are projects that they can engage with in small groups and even completely social distance. With proper parent supervision, these are great ways for our students to really engage this portion of the scientific method. So there's that idea, the big idea of access, getting students the ability to get away from the confines of what is their schoolhouse, their residence, their space of recreation. Allowing that diversity is good so for social emotional well-being, but also really, really great in giving our students the ability to access science away from what they will be able to access because of the pandemic. But how can they make an impact? What are ways in which students can engage with STEM that will allow them to really make a difference in their communities, if not immediately, to really start a plan and ideate how to solve some of those big problems that I mentioned earlier? At NextWave STEM, we love using emerging technologies to be able to do this. And when we think about these emerging technologies, we don't think about, okay, here's your drone, go fly it. We don't say, okay, here's your 3D printer, go print something. We can engage our students because we understand that it's a process that's not complicated, but is actually fractioned into discrete steps. The amazing thing that we learn about STEM and especially engineering is that it is a congregation of different skill sets, of different learners, of different professionals, of different disciplines coming together to bring solutions to the table. So when our students are flying drones, when they're learning about drone technology, they're practicing these disciplines of computer science and math and engineering. And in order to fly a drone, we're not just giving them a remote control and say fly. We are actually giving them the tools to learn about the technologies underlying this new emerging technology. Our students are going to have to learn computer science. They're going to have to learn how to code in order to fly the drone autonomously. They're going to need to simulate their flight. This becomes a really interesting opportunity for our students who don't have access to the drone at school, but still want to think about the ways in which they can solve problems and how our drones move through three-dimensional space. And from there, they'll be able to even ideate and build their own use scenarios for real flight. And the great thing about this is that we're not just leaving this into a virtualized space, doing coding like we might see on Khan Academy or a code.org. This code actually lives with a physical drone, such that when our students are hybrid and have those touch points with us, those days where they're in person, or there's a transition back to more normalized in-person learning experiences, we can save that code and connect and fly our drones. Really, really interesting opportunities. In that same vein, we love 3D printing because 3D printing is this process. Students will need to learn computer-aided design and engineering principles. They're able to design in a cloud-based scenario, learning more about the design process. And then there are ways for them to physically interact either with their printer or with their printed object in order to close the loop in that engineering process. When we think about their ability to actually test and ideate and change parts of that engineering product. So some examples here. What are some immediate impacts that our students can make with these different technologies? And in this case, we're really talking about citizen engineering. Our students engaging with solving problems using STEM that help their fellow citizens, that contribute to what's happening in the world around them. Students practicing citizen engineering have this opportunity to make devices that help. Um, I'm originally from Michigan, and many of you have heard in the last few years. And now we're learning more about situations in cities all over the country that we have a lead problem in the United States, where lead water lines, water main lines are going from the streets into people's homes, and this is causing an issue with the health, especially of young children. Um, Students are designing and 3D printing lead filtration devices for homes, really dramatically impacting the cost, the real world monetary cost of lead abatement in homes, sometimes even in their own homes, hitting down, or actually hitting more towards something immediately pressing, the kind of thing that's dominating our zeitgeist right now. The reason why we're online doing these free webinars is the COVID-19 pandemic. And we see students who are putting their skills towards personal protective equipment. And many of us, if we've been brave enough to continue to watch the news and stay abreast of what's going on, we've seen students printing face shields and masks and respirators and even assistive touch devices. And the great thing about 3D printing is that our students are not just limited to what they can ideate and what they can design and print themselves. They have this awesome opportunity to engage with outside previously designed objects as well. There's an entire world of designers and 3D printers who have made their files available online for our students to print. Mary, born and raised in Mont Park. Oh wow, that's awesome. I didn't know that. I had another original Michigander. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm from Detroit originally, a little bit bigger of a town, but not by much. The importance of 3D printing is to engage the process for instruction for our students. Um, in person and remote means that we're able to really pull this process out, dissect it, and give our students these in-person and remote learning opportunities. So when we think about designing, cloud-based design through a Tinkercad allows our students to actually design an object just using something as simple as a Chromebook. Slicing, taking their three-dimensional object that's been designed and turning that into instructions that, in this case, our 3D printer can read and actually do something with is also something students can do removed away from you. You'd be surprised to learn that a 3D printer is able to print in many different ways. And the ability for a student to slice effectively can dramatically change their 3D print. And then when we think about that final print, if we're working in a hybridized learning model, students are able to engage with their actual 3D printer, loading up the filament, um, actually preparing the print, removing it from the print bed, modifying. You can think of sanding and painting and a couple of other post-printing processes that allow the 3D print to really come to life for them. These points of remote and hybrid learning become really, really critical to the kind of work that you might do with 3D printing. So we kind of covered the 3D printing portion, but what about the drone portions? What kind of problems can our students solve using drone technology? Well, the answer is more than a few. Drone technology has progressed now to the point where it's becoming more readily accessible for students um, at a really, really reasonable price point. In large part, the only hindrance to really effective drone use is our understanding of computer science. So when students are working with drones, they're solving usually this big problem of parcel delivery. We see multi-billion-dollar companies also working on this problem as well. Um, when we think about people who are living in rural areas, or and that's not just in the US, but really all over the world, how can we effectively get them what they need? Whether that's medicine or PPE or a way to connect with loved ones or emergency services. Drones become a really low resource way to get an object to some place where we otherwise wouldn't be able to get that object. We also think about drones having the potential to be an assistive protective device. What do I mean by that? In a world where it's difficult for us to get outside, where it's hard for us to make sure, especially amongst populations, I'm thinking of the elderly who cannot risk the exposure to other people due to COVID-19. Drones become a way to serve as eyes for our community. Can we see who is coming and going? Can we monitor the health and well-being of people in their homes? There are, of course, large ethical concerns that we have to wrestle with when we think about that kind of application. But that's something that our students should also be wrestling with. What is right and what is good with regards to the use of drones? There's something that should be a part of their actual moral education. Mary, you're bringing up a great point. We are seeing this idea of monitoring populations, the migrant pathways. You mentioned Darien Gap between Panama and Colombia, or through the Amazon going east and west, vice versa. These are big, global, international problems that we need to wrestle with, and our young people are even being regulated under without understanding why the rules are the way they are, why the laws are the way they are. A drone education goes beyond just understanding the technology and what it can do, but also being able to ask the question why it should do what it does. That's something that we take pride in actually engaging our students with in our curricula at NextWave STEM. But we also see this really interesting application now with respect to drones being used with emergency response and rescue applications. A couple of years ago, and even more recently with the fires that are in Paradise, California, and really it feels like all over the state in California this past summer, we see drones being used in more and more innovative ways. Drones with forward-looking infrared that can fly into dangerous situations and actually detect whether there are human beings in that dangerous situation. That way we can really effectively marshal resources, be efficient, keep human firefighters out of the path of danger unnecessarily. Drones are doing a great job at that. But we see drone technology going even a step further, where drones are large enough where we've seen drones actually carry people out of certain situations. There's actually a Norwegian company that for the past few years has been developing a drone about the size of a car. Has, I think I want to say 16 propellers on it that can lift a fire hose into the air to put out fires. These applications are continuing to grow. We're learning more about physics, we're learning more about the world of integrated sciences and robotics. Drone is another good way of just seeing a flying robot. So these ideas, even though our students might not be able to do all of them, are things that our students can, at the very least, ideate and simulate. So simulation really builds up a foundation for success in our students. And this idea of coding and connecting, not or, but and connecting. Students are able to actually use this online platform. This is completely cloud-based. They will build code using Scratch, both from Scratch, but using the programming language called Scratch to be able to simulate the flight of this drone in a safe environment. But why do we want to simulate first? Just not for the benefit for simulation's sake, but because we want to know the way that our real world drone will behave once this actual code is loaded to that drone. The idea is to get the drone in the air virtually with our students to test the parameters of our flight and then actually connect that physical drone to the code that we've built. The simulation first with our students, understanding how the drone is going to work through the computer science, seeing the drone virtually in 3 dimensions, and then executing that flight when they're back with us in the classroom, in the gym, outside on the football field. We take that learning to a new level, especially since we heighten the expectations that our students have of this technology that we actually give them access to. Hi, you might be able to tell I'm really excited about drones. It is one of my favorite technologies with which we engage in NextWave STEM. So I know I kind of hit you with a fire hose of information. Those two things become really important. Access and impact. Access through the lens of citizen science, the ability for our students to connect with real world scientists, connect with other science learners and students, to connect with other educators in doing science, and to get out of their classrooms becomes really valuable. And then impact, the ability to use emerging technologies to make things, to build solutions and scenarios to help other people in their communities, even if they can't execute those solutions immediately, getting into the process of starting to solve, getting into the engineering design process becomes an amazing longitudinal way for our students to make STEM learning real, for them to know that, okay, there is a practical reason and a real world impactful reason why we're doing the work that we do. So now that I've sprayed you with a fire hose of information, then the big question becomes, what can NextWave STEM do to help you? How can we make your life just a little bit easier? Well, the first is what you're doing right now. Our free webinar series, we've been going since the end of March, and we're going to be going into the future, into the foreseeable future. I don't have an end date for you because I don't know when we're going to end, and I'm really happy to join our educators pretty much each week. Uh, we encourage you to continue to learn and grow your skills. We know there was that flurry of activity when we had to learn how to teach online to make that pivot to an instructional style that many of us have never ever engaged with. We'll continue to do these PDs and make them available for you. But the next thing that we want to encourage you is to consider NextWave STEM programs as a fit for your students. And when we can say consider NextWave STEM programs, there are multiple ways that we deliver these programs. It's a hands-on experience. That means that your students are remote and you want to get them one-to-one with your technology, we can provide that. We're able to ship out the equipment, but not only ship out the equipment to your students, we're actually an instructional company. Our certified STEM teachers are able to deliver the curriculum with high fidelity. It's exciting, it's engaging, it's hands-on with your students. It helps to make their STEM experience that more exciting. But we also want to encourage you to purchase your own NextWave STEM curricula. This isn't something that we're keeping in-house just to do for ourselves. We want to make sure that you have what you need. And that means programs that are appropriate, that are rigorous, that meet NGSS, ST standards, Common Core Math state standards as well, and have the ability to be flipped from the remote to hybrid scenario. When you invest in the NextWave STEM course, you'll also have the opportunity to train with us. If this is your first time working with the technology and you need to learn how to deliver the course, we have 6 hours of training for each subject area that will get you to where you need to go. It's really important that we give you the flexibility to deliver really, really well. So lots and lots of really good information. I want to pause. The chat is open. Those fingers may be flying already. Do you have any questions about citizen science or citizen engineering, drones, or 3D printing, or about NextWave STEM and what we can do for you? The chat is open. Mary's already been super loquacious. We'd love to hear from any of our attendees as well about any questions that you have. So this is the moment where I'm a little bit silent and I let those fingers do the talking. And believe you me, there's no such thing as a bad question. No questions coming in so far. And that's not a bad thing. I'll just give us a couple more moments just in the event that someone has a question. Well, that is not a problem. That encourages me to know that I've done a decent enough job here. But if you're rolling around a presentation today or webinar in your head a little bit more and you think of a question that you might have, reaching me is really, really easy. I need to update my title on this particular slide. I'm the Chief Learning Officer now at NextWave STEM, but my email is super, super easy. I am Desmond at NextWave STEM. You can find us on most major social media platforms. We're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, we are on Instagram, and we are on Facebook as well. We are not on TikTok, but we might be. I personally don't tick and I don't talk either. That is something that we may get into the future. If you have any questions and want to get into the weeds, we love those questions and we love to connect you with our school partnerships manager in the event that you just want to learn some more information to get started. And Herman, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I hope that this presentation was helpful for all of us who were online. Give us something to consider as we are continuing to source new material and even now lesson plan for STEM experiences for our students who may be remote. To all of us who were able to join today, I am so appreciative of your time. I'm just asking that you all stay safe and be well until we see you on our next webinar. Until then, everyone have a wonderful rest of your day and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye now.